r/TIFU by being so neglectful my kid called me their stalker. Hashtag chunk 1. The email notification popped up on my phone at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and I knew immediately something was wrong. It was from the school, not an automated message, but from the guidance counselor herself, asking me to call at my earliest convenience regarding a concerning situation involving your son. My hands started shaking as I excused myself from the conference room. 30 seconds later, I was in my car in the parking garage, cell phone pressed to my ear, heart hammering against my ribs. Mr. Patterson. Thank you for calling back so quickly. I wanted to reach out because we had an incident during lunch today. Your son, Marcus, became quite upset when he saw you in the school hallway. The confusion hit me first. I wasn't at the school. I've been in meetings all morning. There was a pause. A long one. Oh, I see. Well, that's actually more concerning. Marcus was adamant that you were here. He told several other students and a teacher that someone was following him. He seemed genuinely frightened. We tried to locate anyone matching your description, but found no one. I think perhaps Marcus may be experiencing some anxiety or... I didn't let her finish. I apologized, thanked her, and hung up. My foot hit the accelerator before I'd fully processed what she'd said. 20 minutes later, I was standing in the guidance counselor's office, genuinely bewildered. Ms. Chen, a woman in her 50s with concerned eyes and a kind of patient expression that screamed, "I deal with anxious parents daily," gestured for me to sit down. Marcus isn't here anymore, it's almost 3, and he goes to his mother's house after school on Tuesdays, she explained gently. But I wanted to talk to you directly. He was very specific about what he saw. Tall man, dark jacket, watching him in the hallway. He said. She paused, choosing her words carefully, that you were stalking him. The words hit like a slap. That's impossible. I was at work. I'm always at work, I said, then immediately heard how that sounded. I mean, I have an alibi. I've been in back-to-back meetings since 8 this morning. I believe you, she said, and I think she meant it. But I'm concerned about Marcus. Has anything changed at home recently? Any unusual stress? Sometimes 12-year-olds can manifest anxiety in interesting ways. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to cry. Instead, I sat there like an idiot, trying to figure out what unusual stress looked like for a kid whose parents had spent 2 years in a custody battle that would have made a reality TV producer salivate. The drive to my ex-wife's house took 15 minutes. 15 minutes of white knuckles on the steering wheel and a running monologue in my head that oscillated between what the hell is going on, and this is your fault, you're never there, he's making things up because you're never there. When Jenna opened the door, I could see Marcus in the living room, sprawled on the couch with his earbuds in, deliberately not looking at me. What's this about Marcus claiming I was stalking him at school? I asked, not bothering with hello. Jenna's face did this interesting thing, a quick flash of something, satisfaction. Guilt? I couldn't tell, followed by an expression of practiced concern. That's what you're asking me? No, hello. No inquiry into how he's actually doing. Jenna, I'm not in the mood. Of course you're not. You're never in the mood for anything except your job. She lowered her voice, but not low enough. Marcus's shoulders tensed on the couch. He called me, crying, saying someone was following him. He was terrified. And you know what I thought? I thought, maybe his father finally decided to show up for once. But apparently not. I was at work. I have 6 people who can confirm. You're always at work. She said it matter-of-factly, like commenting on the weather. Do you know what event you missed last weekend, or have you just completely blocked it out? I didn't answer because I genuinely didn't know. The last 2 years had been a blur of depositions, lawyer meetings, and 70 to 80-hour work weeks trying to maintain the income one needed to satisfy the custody agreement and a child support payment that, frankly, was crippling me. The new job had paid well enough to finally get ahead of the debt, but the hours. Science fair, Jenna continued, her voice almost gentle now. The gentleness somehow worse than the anger. He placed first. In his entire grade level. And he asked me if you could come. I told him you were working, and he said, she paused, he said maybe if he got your attention by having someone follow him, you'd finally show up. The room tilted slightly. He said that. Not in so many words. He's 12, not stupid. But when I asked him what he meant about the stalker, he got very quiet. Said he must have been mistaken. That it was probably just his imagination. She crossed her arms. But here's what I think happened. I think he's so starved for your attention that he's literally fantasizing about scenarios where you're interested enough in him to watch him. That's what's happening, Adam. Your son is so neglected that he's inventing an alternate reality where you care enough to follow him around. I sat down on the nearest chair without being invited. My chest felt tight, like I'd run a marathon, even though I'd only driven here. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see Marcus still pretending he couldn't hear us, still staring at his phone. I do care, I said quietly. And it sounded so pathetic, even to me. Show him, Jenna said. She wasn't being cruel anymore. That was almost worse. He turns 14 in less than 2 years. After that, the custody agreement lets him choose where he wants to live. And Adam, if things keep going the way they're going. She didn't finish. She didn't need to. I drove back to work because I didn't know what else to do. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 30 minutes, then went back inside and finished my quarterly reports like a robot. It wasn't until I got home at 10 p.m. to my empty apartment that I finally understood what Jenna had been saying. My son wasn't being manipulated by his mother's vendetta anymore, he was being crushed under the weight of my ambition. And I had no idea how to fix it. Hashtag chunk 2. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my couch in the dark, laptop open to my work email, reading through the calendar invites that had accumulated over the past 3 months. Every single one of them was mine, meetings I'd scheduled, client calls I demanded to lead, projects I'd volunteered for. The pattern was so clear when you weren't actively living inside it, I was drowning myself on purpose. At 3 a.m., I pulled up the custody agreement on my phone and reread the clause about Marcus's preferences. Jenna had been right. 2 years. That was the window. 14 years old, and Marcus could legally choose where to spend his time. And given that his current perception of me was stalker, the odds weren't in my favor. I called in sick the next day. Then the next day. By Friday, my boss was calling me directly. Adam, what's going on? You've never taken unscheduled time off in the 3 years you've been here. Is everything okay? No, I wanted to say. Asterisk nothing is okay. My kid thinks I'm a creep, my ex-wife is right about me being a neglectful asshole, and I've spent so much money and time chasing a paycheck that I forgot to actually live, asterisk. Instead, I said, family emergency. I'll be back Monday. I wasn't back Monday. I spent the entire weekend researching. Part-time jobs. Freelance opportunities. The financial implications of dropping from my current salary to literally half of what I was making. I ran the numbers obsessively, staring at spreadsheets until my eyes burned. Child support would become a problem. The apartment would probably have to go. I'd need to find somewhere cheaper, possibly a studio or a 2-bedroom where Marcus could have his own space if, when, he started coming over again. The math didn't work. It didn't work any way I tried to calculate it. But then again, neither did my current life, so what did that matter? Monday morning, I walked into my boss's office and asked for a meeting. Mark Silverman was the kind of guy who'd built an empire on the backs of people like me, hungry, ambitious, willing to sacrifice. He took one look at my face and sighed. You're quitting, he said. Not a question. Not quitting. Requesting a position change. Part-time consulting. Flexible schedule. He laughed. Actually laughed. Adam, we don't have part-time consulting positions. We have full-time careers and people who go home at 5. You're not a 5 p.m. person. I need to be, I said quietly. His expression shifted. He leaned back in his chair, studying me like I was a puzzle he was trying to solve. This is about the custody thing, isn't it? Your ex mentioned something at that networking event last month. Of course she had. Of course Jenna had run into Mark at some downtown event and probably painted me as the deadbeat dad while she sipped a martini. It's about my son, I corrected. I'm missing his life. And you think part-time consulting is going to fix that? Adam, you'll make a quarter of what you're making now. You'll be scrambling to pay your obligations. You'll be stressed and broke and probably more absent than ever. Maybe, I said. But at least I'll be trying. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he opened his desk drawer and pulled out a business card. My brother runs a firm that does project-based work. Contract stuff. You pick what you want, you do it, you're done. Flexible as hell. I'll give him a call, tell him you're coming. I took the card, grateful and terrified in equal measure. You're making a mistake, Mark said, but he said it without malice. But at least you're making it for your kid. That's something. The firm, Hartwell and Associates, was smaller than my current job, tucked into a co-working space in a converted warehouse. Mark's brother, Richard, was nothing like Mark. He was 50-something and grandfatherly, with reading glasses on a chain and a coffee cup that said, World's Okayest Project Manager. Mark says you've got solid experience but you need to step back from the rat race, Richard said, scrolling through my resume. That's not something I hear often. My son needs me, I said. And I've been choosing not to be there. He looked at me over his glasses. Okay. Here's what I can offer, contract work, mostly. Client projects that run anywhere from 2 weeks to 3 months. You pick what you want, you schedule around your life, not the other way around. Pay isn't great, probably 60 grand a year if you're busy, maybe less if you're not. But you'll have your time. 60,000. $60,000 on which to pay child support, rent, utilities, food, and somehow still be present. What happens if I can't make the child support payments? I asked. Then you talk to your lawyer and your ex about modifying the agreement, he said simply. It happens more often than you'd think. Life changes. Income changes. The court understands. The court. Where I'd have to face Jenna again. Where she'd probably have her lawyer ready with documentation about how I'd voluntarily reduced my income, making me look even more irresponsible. But the alternative was staying on the treadmill forever. Okay, I said. When can I start? By Wednesday, I'd give a notice at my old job. By Friday, I'd signed a lease on a smaller apartment in a less fancy neighborhood. By the following Monday, I was sitting in my lawyer's office, explaining that I needed to modify my child support arrangement due to a voluntary job change. My lawyer, Susan, was the same woman who'd represented me through the custody battle. She was brutally practical. They're going to argue that you're doing this to avoid your obligations, she said flatly. I'm doing it because my son thinks I'm a stalker, I said. She blinked. Okay, that's a new one. Explain. So I did. All of it. The school incident, the science fair, the conversation with Jenna, the realization that I'd accidentally convinced my kid I didn't love him by working constantly to show him I did. Susan listened without interrupting. When I finished, she set down her pen and folded her hands. This is going to be messy, she said. She'll fight the modification. She'll argue that you're being irresponsible. The judge might even agree. But, she paused, depending on what you can show about your time with Marcus going forward, you might have a case. And honestly, a parent who voluntarily reduces their income to spend time with their kid is a better story than I usually get to tell. So what do I do? I asked. You document everything. Every time you pick him up. Every event you attend. Every conversation. You become so present in his life that by the time this modification hearing happens, nobody can question whether you're trying. I nodded, but my stomach was churning. There was only one problem with that plan. Marcus still thought I was a stalker. And I had no idea how to undo that. #Chunk 3. I'd been sitting in my new apartment, studio apartment, really, with a Murphy bed and a kitchenette that looked like it was designed for people who didn't actually eat, for 3 days before I realized I had no idea how to contact Marcus without it looking like stalking. That was the cruelest part of the whole thing. I had legal custody every other weekend. I had scheduled visitation rights spelled out in a document. But showing up at his school, calling him directly, texting him, all of it now felt like it needed to be filtered through Jenna, and I'd learned the hard way that Jenna was not a reliable filter. I pulled up my phone and stared at her contact information. We had a custody management app for communication, something clinical and documented that meant neither of us could claim the other had said something we didn't. I typed out a message 3 times and deleted it 3 times. Hi Jenna, I'd like to arrange to pick up Marcus for his scheduled weekend on the 15th. Too formal. Too much like I was reading off a script. Can Marcus do this weekend? Too casual. Like I was asking about borrowing a tool, not asking about my own son. I settled on something in the middle and hit send before I could overthink it further. Asterisk I'd like to confirm pickup for Marcus this Saturday. 10 a.m. as scheduled, asterisk. The response came back within 10 minutes, which meant she was sitting on her phone waiting. Asterisk he's not interested in visitation right now. He has a soccer tournament, asterisk. I checked the calendar in my head. There wasn't a tournament on the 15th. I knew because I'd spent the last 3 months keeping meticulous track of his schedule, games, practices, school events, his Tuesday rehearsals for the school play. The same obsessive tracking that had somehow crossed the line into stalking in everyone's mind. Asterisk I have him scheduled for this weekend per the custody agreement. What time is the tournament, asterisk? 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. I watched them like they were a heartbeat. Asterisk I'm not doing this with you right now, Adam. He doesn't want to see you. He said as much. I'm not going to force him to come over and be miserable, asterisk. My hands clenched. I set the phone down before I could type something I'd regret, something that would give her more ammunition, more proof that I was the problem. I took 4 deep breaths like my therapist, yes, I'd finally booked one, had suggested. Then I typed, asterisk I understand he's upset. I'd still like to spend time with him. Perhaps we could discuss what that looks like, asterisk. She didn't respond. Not for 2 hours. I went to the grocery store and bought ingredients for the tacos Marcus liked, even though I had no idea if I'd actually get him this weekend. I spent 40 minutes standing in the produce section, trying to remember if he preferred his lettuce shredded or chopped, and hating myself for not immediately knowing the answer. When I got back, her message was waiting. Asterisk I'm open to a conversation. But it needs to happen with a mediator present. His therapist recommended family counseling before he agrees to overnight visits. He's dealing with a lot of anxiety about the divorce, asterisk. A mediator. A therapist. Another adult in the room to witness what a failure I was as a father. The logical part of my brain understood that this was actually good, structured, documented, the kind of thing Susan would want for the modification hearing. The emotional part of my brain felt like I was drowning. But I typed, asterisk that sounds reasonable. Can you send me the therapist's information, asterisk? She sent it over immediately. Dr. Patricia Morrison, LCSW, specializing in family trauma and childhood anxiety. The appointment slots showed she had an opening on Thursday evening at 5 p.m. and Friday at 3 p.m. I booked both, Thursday to meet with her alone, Friday for a session with Marcus if he would agree to it. Then I sat down at my tiny kitchen table and tried to eat dinner while my stomach twisted itself into knots. Thursday came too fast and too slow simultaneously. I spent the morning alternating between looking over my new contract work, a relatively simple website redesign for a non-profit, 60-hour project, and Googling how to repair relationship with a strange child, which was apparently the kind of search that only returned self-help books with terrible reviews and Reddit threads of people who had it way worse than me. Dar. Morrison's office was in a professional building downtown, the kind of place that smelled like coffee and neutral paint colors. The waiting room had those fake plants and a white noise machine that sounded like ocean waves. I sat there for 15 minutes before the inner door opened and a woman in her 60s smiled gently at me. Adam. I'm Dr. Morrison. Come on back. Her office was worse than the waiting room, all soft colors and diplomas and a tissue box positioned strategically on the side table like she was expecting me to cry. Which I might have. The jury was still out. Jenna reached out to me about family counseling, she said, settling into a chair across from me. She mentioned that Marcus is experiencing some anxiety around visitation with you. Before we talk about what family sessions might look like, I'd like to understand your perspective. So I told her. All of it. The new job I'd quit, the custody agreement, the school event I'd crashed, the word stalker landing like a punch. I told her about the 80-hour weeks and the guilt that felt like a living thing in my chest, and how I'd somehow managed to neglect my son while trying to prove I was reliable. She listened the way Susan had, without interrupting, just taking notes, occasionally nodding. One thing I want to be clear about, she said when I finished, is that Marcus's anxiety is real, regardless of its origins. Whether he's being influenced by his mother or whether he's genuinely feeling unsafe around you or both, his feelings are valid. That sentence hit different. Because she was right. Even if Jenna was poisoning him against me, even if she was the source of this whole mess, Marcus still felt this way. The validity of his feelings didn't depend on where they came from. What do I do? I asked. You show up, she said. Not just physically. Emotionally. You listen to what he's feeling without trying to defend yourself or explain how it's Jenna's fault. You accept that repairing this is going to take time and consistency and genuine interest in his life, not just your presence in his life. Do you understand the difference? I wasn't sure I did, but I said yes anyway. Friday at 3 p.m., Marcus will be here, she continued. He's agreed to it, though I should tell you he's nervous. I'd like you to be prepared for him to be withdrawn, possibly hostile. That doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're beginning. I nodded, not trusting my voice. And Adam, she said as I stood to leave. The stalking incident, that was a mistake. But it doesn't define what comes next. What comes next is up to you. Hashtag chunk 4. Friday at 3 p.m. felt like it was approaching at the speed of a glacier. I didn't sleep Thursday night. I lay in bed in my efficiency apartment, which was really just a studio with delusions of grandeur, and stared at the ceiling, running through every possible scenario. Marcus would be hostile. Marcus would refuse to speak. Marcus would cry. Marcus would ask me why I'd missed his birthday party last month, and I wouldn't have a good answer except work and I'm sorry, which weren't the same thing at all. I rehearsed opening lines like an actor preparing for an audition, each one worse than the last. Hi buddy, how've you been? Too casual, like we'd just seen each other last week instead of 6 weeks ago. I know you're angry, and that's okay, too dismissive of his feelings, like I was already moving past them instead of sitting with them. I messed up, true, but what did that accomplish? It made it about my guilt instead of his hurt. By Friday morning, I'd given up on opening lines entirely. I called Susan at the office around 9 a.m., which was probably inappropriate, but I was desperate. How are you feeling? She asked, her voice shifting into the gentle therapist cadence she reserved for actual clients. Like I'm about to walk into a room and get told exactly how badly I've failed, I said. That's possible, she said, and I appreciated that she didn't try to sugarcoat it. That's also not the same as actually failing. And it's certainly not the same as failing irreversibly. How are you planning to handle it if Marcus is hostile? I have no idea. Good, she said. That's honest. Here's what I'd suggest, go in there with zero agenda except to listen. Not to explain, not to defend, not to promise things you might not be able to deliver. Just listen. Can you do that? I can try. That's all anyone can ask. I got to Dr. Morrison's office 20 minutes early, which meant I sat in my car in the parking garage for 20 minutes, gripping the steering wheel and practicing breathing exercises that did nothing except make me dizzy. When I finally went upstairs, the waiting room was empty. I signed in on a clipboard, the receptionist smiled at me sympathetically, which was somehow worse than if she'd ignored me, and sat in the same chair I'd occupied Thursday. The door to the inner hallway opened at exactly 3 p.m. Dr. Morrison stepped out, her expression carefully neutral in that therapist way. Behind her came Marcus. He looked smaller than I remembered, which didn't make sense because it had only been 6 weeks. But he did, he was wearing a hoodie even though it was 75 degrees outside, and his shoulders were hunched in a way that made him look like he was trying to fold himself in half. He saw me and immediately looked at the ground. Come on in, you too, Dr. Morrison said gently. The office had been rearranged since Thursday. Instead of the strategic setup with her chair positioned to observe both of us, there were 3 chairs now arranged in a sort of triangle, with Dr. Morrison's at the apex. Marcus took the chair furthest from me. I sat in the remaining one, close enough that we could theoretically have a conversation, far enough that he had an escape route. How are you both feeling? Dr. Morrison asked. Fine, Marcus said immediately, his voice barely a whisper. I'm nervous, I said, and Marcus flinched slightly at the honesty of it. Dr. Morrison nodded. That's understandable. Adam, I want to start by asking you something, and I want you to answer truthfully. When you showed up at Marcus's school event, were you trying to surprise him? Or were you trying to monitor his activities? It was a trap. I could feel it. There was a right answer and a wrong answer, and the wrong one would confirm everything Marcus already believed about me. I thought about lying. I thought about giving her the answer she wanted. And then I thought about what she'd said about the difference between showing up physically and showing up emotionally. Both, I said. I wanted to surprise him, which was selfish because it was really about me wanting him to be happy to see me. But honestly, I was also keeping track of his schedule. I had his entire calendar documented, practices, games, performances, everything. I checked it obsessively. And I told myself it was because I wanted to be involved, but I think I was trying to prove I could still be his father even when I wasn't actually in his life. Does that make sense? Marcus was staring at his hands so hard I thought he might bore a hole through them. Marcus, Dr. Morrison said gently, what did you want to say to your dad? I don't. Marcus started, then stopped. His jaw clenched. You don't get to just show up and pretend like you care when you're never around. You missed my birthday. You missed the school play last month. You're always working and then you act surprised that I don't want to see you, and when I say I don't want to see you, you show up anyway like you know what I want better than I do. His voice didn't rise. That was almost worse than yelling. It was the calm, tired voice of someone who'd given up on being heard. You're right, I said. All of that is right. I did miss your birthday. I did miss the play. Don't, Marcus started. I'm not going to make excuses, I continued quietly. There's no excuse that makes it okay. You needed me there and I wasn't. And then I made it worse by showing up at your school like that instead of respecting the boundaries you were setting. Marcus looked up at me for the first time, and his eyes were red. Not from crying yet, but like the crying was backed up behind a dam somewhere. Do you even know anything about me anymore? He asked. The question landed like a gut punch. I'm not sure, I admitted. I know you have a soccer tournament coming up. I know you're in the school play, or were. I know you have rehearsals on Tuesdays. But that's just facts. I don't know what you're thinking about. What you're worried about. What makes you happy. Do you want to tell me? Marcus turned to Dr. Morrison like he was asking permission. This is your time, she said. You decide what you want to share. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. I thought he was going to shut down, close himself off further. But then, very quietly, he started talking about school, about the AP math class he was worried he wouldn't pass, about a friend who'd started hanging out with a different crowd and wasn't texting him back, about the school play and how he'd messed up his lines on opening night and no one noticed because he was in a chorus, but he'd noticed. And I listened. I didn't try to fix it or minimize it or tell him he was overthinking things. I just listened. And somewhere around the 20-minute mark, I realized that this specific moment of me shutting up and actually paying attention, might be the most important thing I'd done in months. Dr. Morrison was smiling slightly. It was progress, her expression seemed to say. It was the smallest, most fragile kind of beginning. Chunk 5. The session ended at 3:45, and Dr. Morrison walked us to the door with that careful therapist neutrality still in place. I'd like to see you both again next week, she said. Same time. Marcus nodded without looking at me. I said, of course, and tried not to sound like I was grasping at a lifeline, even though I absolutely was. In the hallway, I didn't know what to do. Did I walk out with him? Did I let him go ahead? Did I try to say something or just let the conversation we'd had in there be enough? The uncertainty was paralyzing. Marcus solved it by moving toward the elevator without waiting for me, so I followed a few steps behind, trying not to feel like I was stalking him all over again. Hey, I said as we waited for the elevator doors to open. I know you probably have stuff to do, but could we grab a bite? There's a deli downstairs, or... I can't, Marcus said. Mom's picking me up. She said she'd be here at 4:15. Of course she was. Of course she timed her pickup specifically to minimize any additional time I might spend with him. I checked my watch, 3:52. 13 minutes to get downstairs and out front. Okay, I said. That's fine. But maybe next time, after our session with Dr. Morrison, we could plan something. Something you'd actually want to do. The elevator arrived. Marcus stepped in and pressed the button for the ground floor. I got in beside him, and we stood in silence as the doors closed and we began our descent. Mom said I don't have to keep doing these sessions, Marcus said suddenly, his eyes fixed on the glowing floor numbers above the door. She said they're optional and if I'm uncomfortable, I can stop. My stomach dropped. Are you uncomfortable? No, he said quietly. I don't know. Maybe. I don't like talking about feelings like I'm broken. You're not broken, I said, and heard how desperate I sounded. It's a place where we can talk without all the other stuff getting in the way. The elevator dinged as we reached the ground floor. The doors slid open to the lobby. Mom says that's manipulation, Marcus said as he stepped out. She says that therapy is supposed to help you process things, but it can also be used as a tool to, he made air quotes with his fingers, which broke my heart a little because it was so clearly something rehearsed, something he'd been fed. Manufacture forgiveness. I followed him out onto the street, the late afternoon sun hitting us both like a physical thing. Do you feel like your feelings are being manufactured? I asked. I don't know what I feel, Marcus said, and there was a crack in his voice now, a real one. That's the problem. Mom's mad at you. Grandma's mad at you. But I'm supposed to also be mad at you, and I am, I think, but also you showed up and you listened today and that wasn't what I expected and now I'm confused and I don't like being confused. A silver SUV pulled up to the curb across the street. Stephanie lowered the window and waved with a smile so bright it looked like it had been professionally applied. Marcus. Come on, honey, we're going to be late for your soccer practice. Marcus's face shifted into neutral mode. I have to go. I know, I said. But Marcus, what you said about being confused. That's okay. That's actually really normal. And you don't have to figure it all out right now. He was already walking toward the SUV, and I watched as Stephanie made some kind of comment to him that I couldn't hear. He laughed, actually laughed, and climbed into the passenger seat. The SUV pulled away from the curb, and I stood there on the sidewalk watching them go, feeling the exact opposite of what I'd felt leaving Thursday's session. That evening, I sat in my apartment and made a spreadsheet. I know that sounds absurd. I know that in the middle of an emotional crisis, the last thing a rational person would do is organize their feelings into columns and rows. But I'd spent 15 years in corporate environments where everything got broken down into metrics and data points, and my brain was basically hardwired to process information that way. On the left, I listed everything Marcus had told me in the session: AP math class anxiety, friend drama, school play mistake, tutoring on Wednesdays, new interest in graphic novels, worry about whether he was good enough at soccer. On the right, I made a second column with questions. What are the specific topics in AP math he's struggling with? Who's the friend? What graphic novels? Does he actually enjoy soccer, or does he feel obligated to continue because he's been playing since he was 7? It was depressing. It was an inventory of how little I actually knew about my own child, not because of malice, but because I'd convinced myself that showing up sporadically and keeping tabs on his schedule was equivalent to being present. I'd optimized for quantity of gesture, making his birthday special, attending his events, rather than quality of attention, knowing his daily thoughts, his anxieties, his actual interests versus his perceived interests. My phone buzzed around 8 p.m. A text from an unknown number, *, this is Susan. Don't take it too hard. Marcus said some difficult things today, but his willingness to talk at all is significant. He could have shut down completely. He didn't. That's not nothing, *. I stared at the message for a long time. It was kind. It was also the professional equivalent of a parent telling you that your mediocre child had tried very hard, which was somehow both comforting and soul-crushing. I texted back, how do I fix this? The response took 5 minutes, *, you don't fix it. You show up consistently, you listen without agenda, and you accept that rebuilding trust takes time. There's no quick solution. There's only the slow work of actually being present, *. What if I'm not good at slow, I wrote. *, then you learn to be. Because the alternative is losing him completely, *. That was what got me out of bed at 5 a.m. the next morning. Not motivation or hope or any of the self-help mantras I'd been reading online. It was pure fear. Fear so specific and immediate that it felt like drowning, the knowledge that in roughly 2 years, Marcus would be old enough to choose, and if I hadn't changed by then, if I hadn't actually rebuilt something real with him, he would choose his mother. I called my boss at 7 a.m. on Monday morning. #chunk6. I need to talk to you about my schedule, I said, and I could hear the tremor in my own voice even though I'd rehearsed this a dozen times in the shower. There was a pause. A long one. My boss, Richard, was not a man who appreciated surprises, and what I was about to do was going to blindside him right before our quarterly earnings call. Okay, he said slowly. My office. 15 minutes. The walk there felt like walking to an execution. I'd been at Mercer and Associates for just under 2 years, the position that had saved me financially after the custody battle drained my savings. The position that had required me to sacrifice my Saturdays, my evenings, my mental health, and apparently my relationship with my child. At $185,000 a year, it had felt like redemption. At 80 hours a week, it felt like a different kind of imprisonment. Richard's office overlooked the city from the 34th floor. He liked to remind people of this view whenever they came in asking for something he didn't want to give them. He was already sitting behind his desk, fingers steepled, when I arrived. Talk, he said. I need to transition to part-time, I said. 25 hours a week, starting immediately. He laughed. Actually laughed. No, you don't. I do. It's not negotiable. Everything's negotiable, Richard said, but his tone had shifted into something harder. Especially when someone's in the middle of proving themselves. You know you're on track for senior director within 18 months. You're one of the most valuable people in this office. Why would you want to throw that away? Because my kid is calling me a stalker, I said, and I hadn't planned to say it like that, so raw and honest. But there it was. Because I'm losing him, and no amount of money is going to fix that. Richard leaned back in his chair. Is this about the custody situation? Because legally, you're probably in a better position financially if you can show. It's not about custody, I interrupted. It's about the fact that I don't actually know my son anymore. I show up to events he didn't invite me to. I know his schedule better than I know what he cares about. And I'm realizing that might be because I've been so focused on proving I could keep up financially that I forgot to actually be his parent. That's a conversation for a therapist, Richard said, not for me. And I'm telling you that if you walk out of here at part-time, there's no way I can justify keeping you in a senior position. You'd be looking at maybe 40% of your current salary. Probably less. 40%. That was $74,000 a year. I'd done the math 17 times on my laptop at 3 a.m. With the child support payments, rent, insurance, student loans, there was going to be a gap. A real, painful gap. I understand, I said. I'm prepared for that. Are you? Richard asked, and his expression shifted to something almost sympathetic, which was somehow worse than the dismissal. Because I've been in this field for 28 years, and I've seen a lot of people make dramatic life decisions based on emotional crises. You're having a bad week. Maybe a bad month. But in 6 months, when you're looking at a smaller apartment, when you're stressed about money again, when your ex is using the income reduction against you in court, because trust me, she will, you're going to regret this. He wasn't wrong. I could feel the trap of his logic because it was sound logic. It was the same logic that had gotten me to this point in the first place. The belief that financial stability was the foundation that everything else could be built on. The belief that if I could just make enough money, everything would resolve itself. Probably, I admitted. But I'm doing it anyway. Richard was quiet for a moment. Then he said, give me 2 weeks. We're in the middle of the Hartley contract. If you bail now, it's going to tank, and that's going to tank your reference. But if you give me 2 weeks to bring someone else up to speed, I can transition you out with your reputation intact. Part-time status starts January 15th. That's the best I can do. It wasn't what I wanted, but it was better than I'd feared. Thank you, I said. Don't thank me yet, Richard said. You haven't lived through what comes next. I left his office and immediately called my ex-wife's lawyer. I know that sounds reactive and dramatic, but the reality is that changing my income situation by more than 50% is a reportable event in custody arrangements, and I wanted to get ahead of it rather than have Stephanie's legal team ambush me with it in 3 months. The conversation with the lawyer lasted 20 minutes and cost me $400. The summary was, yes, this change would likely trigger a custody agreement modification. No, it wouldn't automatically result in increased child support, which was what I'd feared, but it also wouldn't decrease it because the agreement was already based on my documented income. What it would do is give Stephanie ammunition to argue that I was prioritizing myself over financial responsibility, which was laughable considering I was making this change specifically for Marcus, but I understood how it would look in court. What's your reasoning? The lawyer asked. If you're going to file the modification notice, we need to establish why you're making this decision. To spend time with my son, I said. To be more present in his life. There was a pause. Then, that's actually good. It's personal and protective. But I'd recommend getting that therapist, Dr. Morrison, right, to document it. Have her note in writing that she recommended increased parental presence as beneficial to your child's mental health. That gives you real grounds for the change, not just I'm feeling guilty. So that's what I did on Tuesday morning. I called Dr. Morrison's office and asked for an emergency appointment. Not for therapy, for a brief consultation to discuss what I was planning and whether she'd be willing to put something in writing. She agreed to see me at 12:30 p.m. You're making a significant financial decision, she said when I explained it to her. That tells me you've shifted your priority structure. How does that feel? Terrifying, I said. But right. Both of those things can be true, she said. And yes, I can document my professional opinion that increased parental presence and attention would be therapeutically beneficial to Marcus. But I want to be clear about something, this isn't a magic fix. You're not buying forgiveness with your time the way you were trying to buy it with money. The work you're doing now, that requires genuine change, not just schedule rearrangement. I know, I said. Do you? She asked. Because I've seen parents make grand gestures and then get frustrated when their child doesn't immediately respond with gratitude. Marcus has spent months building walls. Walls don't come down in a few weeks just because you're suddenly available. You need to be prepared for that. I left her office with a letter documenting her professional recommendation, filed the modification paperwork with my lawyer, and sent Stephanie's legal team the notice that same afternoon. The response came through her lawyer within an hour. My client is open to discussing reasonable modifications to the custody arrangement. Which was, I knew, lawyer speak for, we can use this against you, but maybe we won't if you give us what we want. The real test, though, was Marcus. He didn't know about any of this yet. He didn't know that in 2 weeks, I would be available in ways I'd never been before. He didn't know that I was about to blow up my financial recovery plan for the possibility of being part of his life again. And I had no idea how he would react. Chunk 7. The 2 weeks of knowledge before action is a specific kind of torture. I knew what I was about to do. Richard knew. My lawyer knew. Dr. Morrison knew. Stephanie's legal team definitely knew. But Marcus didn't, and the weight of that secret felt like carrying something heavy in my chest that was slowly poisoning me from the inside. I kept wanting to tell him. There were moments, driving him to soccer practice on Wednesday, picking him up from school on Thursday, where the words were literally on my tongue. *K, buddy, I'm making some changes. Big changes. I'm going to be around more, but I could already see how he'd react. The suspicion in his eyes. The assumption that I was doing this because of the custody fight, not because of him. Or worse, the fear that this was another promise I'd make and then break, another plan that would get derailed by work emergencies and ambition and the constant financial pressure of trying to rebuild a life that had exploded 4 years ago. So I stayed quiet, and in that quietness, everything at work became both sharper and more distant. The Hartley contract suddenly consumed all my attention in a way that felt almost frantic. Richard had given me 2 weeks, and I was determined to make sure that transition was seamless, thorough, professional. There was a part of me, the part that had built this career in the first place, that needed to know I was leaving something good behind. That I wasn't just running away. But there's a specific exhaustion that comes from doing a job you're already emotionally checking out of. On Friday, 3 days into the 2-week countdown, I made a mistake on one of the portfolio projections. Nothing catastrophic, nothing that would tank the deal. But it was sloppy. The kind of mistake that I wouldn't have made 6 months ago, when I was still fighting to prove myself to Richard and everyone else in that office. You see this? Richard said, pointing at the spreadsheet I'd submitted. This is what happens when people's heads aren't in the game. I know, I said. I'll fix it. Yeah, you will. But that's not the point. He set the document down carefully, like he was handling evidence. The point is that you're already gone. You're already in your head about leaving. Which is exactly why people should never do what you're about to do. You lose focus. You become a liability. I wanted to argue with him. I wanted to say that this was temporary, that I'd be focused again after the transition, that my personal life and professional life were different compartments that shouldn't have to affect each other. But I knew that was bullshit, and I think Richard knew it too. That night, I went home and looked at my finances again. The spreadsheet I'd created had become its own kind of obsession. Different scenarios. Different variables. What if I needed to increase hours? What if the custody agreement modification went badly? What if Stephanie's lawyer was right, and the pay cut gave her legal ammunition in ways I hadn't anticipated? What if Marcus's reaction to my increased presence was so negative that he asked to stay with his mother full-time anyway? I was spiraling. I could feel it happening, the same anxiety-driven catastrophizing that had defined my whole life post-divorce. The belief that if I could just calculate everything perfectly, if I could just anticipate every possible problem, I could control outcomes. Which is insane, because outcomes don't work that way. People don't work that way. Kids especially don't work that way. My phone rang at 11:47 p.m. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Is this Marcus's father? A woman's voice, professional but urgent. My entire body went cold. Yes. This is he. Who is this? This is Susan Reeves from Riverside Middle School. I'm calling about an incident that occurred today that we wanted to notify you of. An incident. The word hung in the air like a threat. What kind of incident? I asked, and I was already standing up, already reaching for my keys, my mind spiraling through possibilities. An accident. A fight. Something involving drugs or weapons or... Marcus got into an altercation with another student during lunch today, Ms. Reeves said. Nothing that resulted in serious physical injury, but there was enough disruption that we felt we needed to involve parents. He's currently in the nurse's office. He has a small cut on his arm and some minor bruising on his shoulder. He's physically fine, but emotionally he seems quite distressed. I was already out the door. I'm coming to get him. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Actually, Mr. Patterson, we've already notified his mother. She's on her way to pick him up. We're required to release him to a guardian, and since she has primary custody. I'm his parent too, I said, and the anger in my voice surprised even me. I'm coming to get my son. I drove like someone operating on pure adrenaline, running 2 red lights and cutting off at least 3 other cars. The school was still lit up when I pulled in, security lights making everything look stark and unreal. I rushed through the front doors and found Marcus sitting in a plastic chair in the nurse's office, a bandage on his left forearm, looking smaller somehow than he had looked 2 days ago at soccer practice. Marcus, I said, and he looked up, and his face did something complicated. Relief and resentment and something else I couldn't quite name. Dad, he said quietly. That was when Stephanie came through the door behind me, her expression tight with controlled fury. He's with me, she said flatly. The school called me. I'm his primary guardian. He's my son too, I said, not taking my eyes off Marcus. And I'm here. Yes, well, Stephanie said, and there was an edge in her voice that made something in my chest twist with recognition. You're always here at the convenient moments, aren't you? When there's a crisis. When you can play the concerned father. Where were you last week when he needed? That's not fair, I said. Isn't it? She turned to Marcus. Come on, honey. We're leaving. Marcus looked between the two of us, and I could see the conflict in his face, the exhaustion of being caught between people he was supposed to love and depend on. Without a word, he stood up and walked toward his mother. Wait, I said. Marcus, please. What happened? Talk to me. He stopped, but he didn't turn around. Someone said something, he said quietly. About you. About how you were always trying to spy on me. About how you don't even care about me, you just care about winning. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were red. And I hit him. I felt something crack open inside my chest. Let's go, Stephanie said, putting her hand on his shoulder. And they walked out together, leaving me standing in that fluorescent-lit nurse's office, realizing that my secret plan had consequences I'd never considered. #Chunk8. The drive home was the longest 10 minutes of my life, and I wasn't even driving. I sat in my apartment, the one that always felt too quiet, too empty, and stared at my phone like it might spontaneously combust. I had 47 unread messages, most from Richard, a few from my lawyer, and several from numbers I recognized as people from work. I ignored all of them. What I kept replaying was Marcus's face when he said those words. You just care about winning, not about money. Not about child support or custody agreements or financial stability. About winning. As if his life was a game I was playing against Stephanie, and he was just a piece on the board. The realization didn't come gently. It hit like that moment when you're falling and your stomach drops before gravity finishes the job. I hadn't been working 80-hour weeks to afford child support. That's what I told myself, and Richard had believed it, and maybe on some level I believed it too. But the truth was uglier and more complicated. I'd been running. I'd been building something I could point to, a paycheck, a career, a demonstration of my value, because those things were quantifiable. Those things proved something. Whereas actually being present with my kid, actually knowing what he cared about and what scared him and who was whispering poison into his ear about me, that was harder. That was uncertain. That was a kind of vulnerability I'd never learned how to handle. Stephanie had done a number on him. I could see that now with brutal clarity. But she'd only been able to do it because I'd given her the raw material to work with. Every missed event. Every phone call I'd cut short because of work. Every promise I'd made and then broken because something urgent came up. I had handed her the evidence and said, "Here, use this. Use this to prove that I don't care." I called my lawyer, David, at midnight. He answered on the third ring, his voice thick with sleep. "It's done," I said. "The job. I'm leaving. Patterson, we talked about this. You need to wait until after the modification hearing. If you quit now." "I don't care," I said, and I meant it. "I don't care what Stephanie's lawyer says about it. I don't care if it looks bad. I'm done." "You're making an emotional decision at midnight." "I'm making the decision I should have made a long time ago," I said. "I'm going to call Richard in the morning and tell him I'm done as of Monday. And then I'm going to find part-time work. Something flexible. Something that lets me actually be my kid's father instead of just being the guy who pays for things." David was quiet for a long moment. "You understand what could happen. Stephanie could use this as evidence that you're financially unstable. She could push for full custody. She could." "I know," I said. "And if that happens, then I'll deal with it. But I'm done letting fear make my decisions." I hung up before he could argue further. The next morning, I sat in Richard's office with my resignation letter already typed out. He read it without expression, which was somehow worse than if he'd yelled at me. "Is this about last night?" he asked finally. "About the portfolio mistake?" "No," I said. "It's about everything before last night. And everything before that." He set the letter down carefully. "You know this is a mistake. You're throwing away a career because you're having some kind of personal crisis." "Maybe," I said. "But I'm throwing away my relationship with my son if I don't. And that's a bigger mistake." To my surprise, Richard's expression softened slightly. "How old is he?" 12. "My daughter turned 18 last month," Richard said quietly. "Didn't invite me to her graduation. Didn't return my calls for 3 months before that. And you know what I realized?" He looked at me directly. "All the money in the world doesn't fix that. I'd trade everything I built here to have those years back." I didn't know what to say to that. "Don't be stupid about this," he continued. "Part-time work is fine, but don't sabotage yourself completely. You still need to eat. You still need to pay child support. And if you fall apart financially, you'll be no good to your kid anyway. Balance is possible. It just takes being intentional about it." I left his office with 2 weeks' notice on his desk and a strange sense of peace that I hadn't felt in years. The hard part came 3 days later. I showed up at Marcus's school, at the front entrance this time, not sneaking around like I had been, and asked the office to call him out. When he came down the hallway, confusion written all over his face, I saw him do the mental math, trying to figure out if there was a problem, if something was wrong. "Hey," I said. "I know your mom probably told you not to talk to me without her there. And I get that. But I need to say something, and I need you to listen." He didn't move closer, but he didn't walk away either. "I was wrong," I said. "About a lot of things. I was so busy trying to prove something, to your mom, to the courts, to myself, I guess, that I missed who you actually are. And I missed being the person you actually needed." I swallowed hard. "I quit my job. I'm going to find something part-time so I can be around more. Not because of custody stuff. Not because of winning anything. But because you're my kid, and I love you, and I've been doing this all wrong." He was silent for a long time. His eyes were guarded, like he was waiting for the catch. "I don't expect you to trust me right away," I continued. "You probably shouldn't. I've broken a lot of promises. But I'm asking you to give me a chance to prove that things are going to be different. Real different. Not just different when it's convenient." "Mom said you were just trying to manipulate me," he said quietly. "Your mom might be right," I said, which seemed to surprise him. "Families get messy. Divorced families get messy, eh? But here's what I know for sure, I love you. Not as a way to win a custody battle. Just because you're my son and I'm your dad. And I want to know you. Really know you. Not just the version I see once a week when I remember to show up." He looked down at his shoes. "Okay," he said finally. "But I'm still going to tell you if I think you're being fake." I laughed, and it came out as a sob. "Deal," I said. It wasn't a fix. It wasn't a beginning. It was just the smallest opening. But standing there in that hallway with my kid, my real kid, the one I was finally starting to actually see, I realized it was enough. It was finally enough.